My name is Bridget Morrison, and I'm 27 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator here in Denver, Colorado. But standing in my childhood kitchen on my 27th birthday, staring at a cake that read, "Happy birthday, Sarah," I realized my own family had forgotten who I was. My younger sister, Sarah, stood beside me, that familiar smirk playing across her lips like she knew exactly what had happened. When I pointed out the obvious mistake to my parents, Mom just shrugged and said the bakery must have gotten confused. Dad barely looked up from his phone. But I knew better. This wasn't some innocent mix-up. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation. And as they excitedly discussed their luxury trip to Hawaii next week, something inside me snapped. They had no idea what I was planning. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're new here, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. You won't believe what happens when I finally disappear on the day of their big vacation. Trust me, this story will have you questioning everything you think you know about family loyalty. Looking back now, I can see the signs were always there, stretching all the way back to our childhood in this same house where I now stood holding that mockingly incorrect cake. Sarah, 3 years younger than me, had always been the golden child. She got the bigger bedroom, the nicer clothes, the family's undivided attention whenever she wanted it. During my high school graduation, Mom and Dad spent the entire reception talking about Sarah's upcoming freshman year instead of celebrating my academic achievements. When I landed my first real job after college, the family dinner that was supposed to celebrate my promotion somehow morphed into an engagement party for Sarah when her boyfriend Derek surprised her with a proposal that night. The pattern became even more obvious during holidays. Last Christmas, Sarah unwrapped a stunning diamond tennis bracelet and matching earrings that must have cost thousands of dollars. My gift was a $50 gift card to a generic department store, still in the plastic sleeve from the checkout counter. When family photos were taken, Sarah always positioned herself front and center while I got pushed to the background, or, more often than not, was cropped out entirely when the pictures got posted on social media. Mom, Margaret, constantly made comparisons that cut deep into my self-esteem. "Why can't you be more like Sarah?" became her favorite refrain whenever I expressed any opinion that differed from the family consensus. Dad, Robert, only called me when he needed something. Usually money, though he never called it that directly. It was always an investment opportunity or an emergency loan that would be paid back as soon as the business deal went through. Those deals never seemed to materialize, but somehow he always had more opportunities that required my financial assistance. Derek, Sarah's boyfriend of 2 years, had seamlessly integrated into this family dynamic. He treated me with the same dismissive attitude as everyone else, often making jokes at my expense during family gatherings while everyone else laughed along. The birthday cake incident felt different, though. More pointed, more cruel than the usual thoughtless behavior I had grown accustomed to. As I stood there looking at Sarah's name written in cheerful pink frosting where mine should have been, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't neglect or favoritism anymore. This was active hostility, and I was done being the target. My job performance at the marketing firm had been suffering for months as the family's stress mounted. I found myself distracted during client meetings, making mistakes on campaigns that I would normally execute flawlessly. That evening, after the disastrous birthday celebration ended with everyone retreating to their respective corners of the house, I discovered something that made everything even worse. There was a family group chat on Mom's phone that she had left unlocked on the kitchen counter. Scrolling through the messages, I found weeks of conversation about the Hawaii trip. Detailed discussions about flights, hotels, restaurant reservations, excursions to Pearl Harbor, and snorkeling adventures. My name wasn't mentioned once. I wasn't just excluded from the planning, I had been completely erased from their vacation reality. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom that still had the same outdated wallpaper from when I was 12, I started researching something I had never imagined I would need to know about: how to disappear. Not permanently, but effectively enough to make a point that would shake this family to its core. I spent hours reading about missing persons cases, about how investigations worked, about what it took to stage a disappearance convincing enough to fool everyone who thought they knew you better than you knew yourself. The first betrayal came the next morning when I confronted Sarah directly about the cake incident. She didn't even try to deny it. "I specifically told the bakery to put my name on it instead of yours," she said with that same smirk, sitting at the breakfast table like she was discussing the weather. "I thought it would be funny. Besides, you're always so serious about everything." I was trying to lighten the mood. The casual cruelty in her voice, the complete absence of any recognition that she had deliberately humiliated me on my birthday, told me everything I needed to know about how this family really saw me. The week following my birthday disaster, I decided to take a closer look at my financial situation. Something about Dad's recent requests for money had been nagging at me, and I wanted to understand exactly how much I had been lending to the family over the years. What I discovered when I pulled my credit reports and bank statements made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about birthday cakes and family photos anymore. This was systematic financial abuse on a scale that I never could have imagined. Mom had been using my credit cards for what she called emergencies for over 2 years. The charges weren't small either. Thousands of dollars at high-end department stores, expensive restaurants, even a weekend spa retreat that I definitely hadn't authorized. When I called the credit card companies to report the fraudulent activity, I learned that someone had called ahead of me, claiming to be me, and authorized all the charges. The voice recordings they played back sounded like Mom doing a pretty convincing impression of my voice. But the credit cards were just the beginning. Dad had borrowed $50,000 from my savings account 18 months ago for what he called a business investment. There was no documentation, no promissory note, no discussion of repayment terms or interest. I had simply trusted him when he said it was temporary and that the returns would benefit the whole family. Now I was learning that there never had been any business investment. The money had disappeared into some black hole that Dad refused to explain, and every time I brought up repayment, he changed the subject. The most devastating discovery came when I traced the purchase of Sarah's engagement ring. Derek had proposed with a stunning 2-carat diamond that must have cost at least $15,000. According to my credit card statement, I had paid for it. The charge appeared on one of my cards the day before the proposal, charged to the same jewelry store where the ring had been purchased. Sarah was literally wearing my money on her finger while she planned a wedding that I apparently wasn't even invited to help finance. Even their upcoming Hawaii trip was being funded entirely by money that had been taken from my accounts without my knowledge or consent. The flights, the resort, the rental car, even the spending money they were planning to take had all been charged to my various credit cards over the past month. I was financing my own exclusion from a family vacation that they were treating like some sort of celebration of their unity without me. When I finally confronted my parents about what I had discovered, the gaslighting was immediate and intense. Mom insisted that family members help each other out financially and that I should be grateful to have the opportunity to contribute to everyone else's happiness. "Family helps family, Bridget," she said in that condescending tone she used when she wanted to make me feel small. "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. Don't you think you owe us something for all of that?" Dad was even worse. He accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, claiming that the money I had worked so hard to save was somehow actually family money that I was just holding temporarily. When I demanded documentation and repayment schedules, he threatened to cut off all contact with me if I continued to harass the family with money talk. The complete lack of remorse or even acknowledgement that what they had done was wrong showed me just how deep this pattern of abuse had become. Sarah, of course, found the whole confrontation entertaining. She actually filmed part of it on her phone, and later that evening I discovered she had posted an edited version on social media. In her version, I came across as a greedy, selfish daughter who was trying to extort money from her loving family. The comments from our extended family and family friends were brutal, all supporting Sarah's narrative and calling me heartless for attacking my parents over money. The final piece of the financial puzzle came when I discovered that Mom had been intercepting my mail for months. Important financial statements, credit card bills, Even official notices from my bank had been diverted to a post office box that she controlled. This wasn't just theft. It was a coordinated campaign to keep me ignorant of how extensively they were draining my accounts. Derek, who I had never particularly liked but had tolerated for Sarah's sake, revealed the ultimate betrayal during a family dinner that week. Apparently thinking he was being helpful, he mentioned casually that my parents were planning to use my inheritance from Grandpa Joe to pay for Sarah's wedding. My grandfather had passed away 6 months earlier and left me a significant amount of money that was supposed to be distributed through his estate. According to Derek, Mom and Dad had been discussing how to access those funds before I could claim them, treating my inheritance like it was community property that belonged to the whole family. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about birthday cakes or vacation exclusions. My family had been systematically stealing from me for years, and they felt completely justified in doing so. They saw me not as a daughter or sister, but as a financial resource to be exploited whenever they needed money for their own desires. And now they were planning to take my inheritance too. The confrontation about the money marked a turning point in the family dynamics, but not in the direction I had hoped. Instead of acknowledging their wrongdoing or attempting to make amends, my family decided to escalate their campaign against me. It was like they had declared war, and I was the enemy combatant who needed to be neutralized before I could cause any more trouble for their comfortable arrangement. Mom's retaliation started with what she called spring cleaning. While I was at work, she went through my old bedroom and accidentally donated all of my childhood belongings to charity. Photo albums, yearbooks, my high school letter jacket, even stuffed animals that had sentimental value were all gone by the time I got home that evening. When I asked about them, she claimed she had thought I didn't want them anymore since I had moved out years ago. The timing was too convenient to be accidental, especially since she had never shown any interest in cleaning out that room before our financial confrontation. Dad's revenge was more directly financial. He called my childhood veterinarian and canceled the insurance policy on my cat, Whiskers, who I had adopted in college, but still lived with my parents because my apartment didn't allow pets. The cancellation meant that when Whiskers needed emergency surgery for a bladder blockage the following week, I was suddenly facing a $3,000 veterinary bill with no insurance coverage. Dad claimed it was an oversight, but the timing made it clear that this was punishment for questioning the family's financial arrangements. Sarah took a different approach to the escalation. She started wearing jewelry that had gone missing from my apartment months earlier. When I accused her of taking it, she claimed the pieces had been gifts from various boyfriends over the years. But I recognized my grandmother's pearl necklace, my college graduation gift earrings, and a bracelet I had saved up for months to buy myself. She was literally wearing my stolen property in front of me while denying that she had taken anything. The social warfare intensified when family friends started turning against me after hearing twisted versions of our conflicts. Mom and Sarah had been busy spreading their narrative throughout their social circles, painting me as an ungrateful daughter who was trying to destroy the family over petty grievances. Church members who had known me since childhood started giving me cold looks and making pointed comments about respecting your parents. Neighbors who used to chat with me when I visited now crossed the street to avoid conversations. The harassment followed me to work when Sarah's friends started calling my office. They claimed to be concerned about my mental health and wanted to speak with my supervisor about whether I was fit to handle my job responsibilities. My boss, Jennifer, called me into her office to ask about the unusual number of calls she was receiving about my personal life. While she was sympathetic and didn't take any disciplinary action, the situation created an uncomfortable cloud of suspicion around my professional reputation. The stalking behavior started subtly. Derek began showing up in places where he had no business being. The coffee shop near my office where I grabbed lunch, the grocery store I frequented, even the gym where I worked out after work. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but when I found a tracking device attached to my car's undercarriage, it became clear that these encounters were being orchestrated. The third betrayal cut deeper than anything that had come before. My grandmother Rose, who had always been my closest ally in the family, suddenly started taking everyone else's side after what she claimed was a clarifying conversation with Mom. Rose had been the one family member who consistently supported me, who remembered my birthday every year, who called just to check on how I was doing. But after Mom's manipulation, even Rose started questioning my motives and suggesting that maybe I was being too harsh on the family. During what should have been a comforting conversation with Rose about the family conflicts, she dropped a bombshell that explained everything. "You know, dear," she said in that gentle voice she used when delivering difficult truths, "you were adopted when you were 6 months old. Your parents have never treated you differently because of that, but maybe that's why you've always felt like you didn't quite fit in with the rest of us." The revelation was devastating, not because I was adopted, but because Rose was using my adoption status to justify the family's treatment of me. The manipulation became even more sinister when I overheard Mom and Dad discussing their next phase of psychological warfare. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could gain power of attorney over my finances. Mom had already made an appointment with a psychiatrist, and they were preparing to present a case that I was having a mental breakdown that made me unable to manage my own affairs. The plan was to have me committed temporarily while they gained legal control over my bank accounts and investments. The conversation I overheard was like something out of a nightmare. They discussed my erratic behavior and paranoid accusations as evidence of declining mental health. They had been building a case against my sanity for weeks, documenting every time I questioned their financial actions as proof that I was becoming unstable. The betrayal was complete and systematic, designed to strip away not just my money, but my basic autonomy as an adult human being. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. I was sitting in a downtown cafe during my lunch break, mindlessly picking at a sandwich while trying to process everything that was happening with my family, when a woman at the next table leaned over and introduced herself. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I couldn't help overhearing your phone conversation earlier. I'm Amanda Chun, and I specialize in financial abuse cases. Would you mind if I offered some perspective on what you're dealing with?" Amanda was exactly what I needed at exactly the right moment. As a lawyer who had spent years working with victims of family financial abuse, she immediately recognized the patterns I described. More importantly, she offered to help me fight back legally and systematically. "What your family is doing to you has a name," she explained. "It's called financial abuse, and it's more common than you might think. The good news is that there are legal remedies available if you're willing to pursue them." Working with Amanda, I began to understand the full scope of what my family had been doing to me. She helped me trace financial records that revealed Dad's business investment had actually been used to pay off massive gambling debts that he had accumulated over several years. The $50,000 I had given him hadn't gone into any legitimate business venture. It had gone directly to bookies and casino creditors who had been threatening him with physical harm if he didn't pay up immediately. Mom knew about Dad's gambling addiction but had been covering for him by systematically draining my accounts to keep him afloat. This explained the pattern of emergency loans and credit card charges that had been happening for years. Every time Dad lost big at the casino or the racetrack, Mom would find a way to access my money to cover his debts and keep the creditors at bay. Amanda helped me install recording equipment in my apartment and my car so that I could document any further harassment or threats from my family. She also began building a comprehensive legal case for financial recovery, gathering evidence of unauthorized credit card usage, forged signatures, and identity theft. The documentation process was extensive, but Amanda assured me that we had more than enough evidence to pursue both criminal charges and civil recovery of my stolen funds. My first real ally at work emerged when my coworker James witnessed an incident that opened his eyes to what was really happening. Derek had shown up at my office building and was waiting in the lobby, claiming to be there for a meeting with one of our clients. When security asked him to leave after it became clear he had no legitimate business there, he started shouting about my mental instability and how my family was worried about my ability to do my job properly. James, who had worked in the cubicle next to mine for 3 years, saw the whole confrontation and started asking questions. When I explained the broader context of what was happening with my family, he immediately offered to help however he could. As someone who had grown up in an abusive household himself, James recognized the gaslighting and manipulation tactics my family was using and became determined to help me fight back. But the family's attacks escalated to a new level when they decided to involve law enforcement in their campaign against me. Mom called the police and reported my car as stolen, claiming that I had taken it without permission and was refusing to return it. The fact that the car was registered in my name and that I had been making the payments for years didn't seem to matter to her. She simply wanted to cause me maximum humiliation and inconvenience. The arrest happened at work, in front of all my colleagues and clients who happened to be in the office that day. 2 police officers walked into the building, asked for me by name, and informed me that I was being arrested for auto theft. Even though the charges were dropped within hours once the ownership documentation was reviewed, the damage to my professional reputation was immediate and severe. Clients started questioning whether they could trust someone who had been arrested, even though the arrest had been based on completely false accusations. James was the one person at work who immediately understood what had really happened. He had witnessed enough of Derek's stalking behavior and strange phone calls to our office to recognize that this was part of a coordinated harassment campaign. After the arrest, James became even more determined to help me gather evidence against my family. He started documenting every unusual call or visit to our office, creating a record that would eventually prove invaluable in demonstrating the pattern of harassment. The incident with the false arrest was the wake-up call I needed to understand that my family wasn't just stealing my money anymore. They were actively trying to destroy my life, my career, and my reputation. The attacks had moved beyond financial abuse into a full-scale assault on my ability to function as an independent adult. Amanda warned me that this level of escalation often indicated that the abusers were feeling desperate and might be planning something even more drastic. That evening, as I sat in Amanda's office reviewing the evidence we had gathered, I realized that I was no longer just defending myself against my family's attacks. I was building a case that could send them to prison and recover everything they had stolen from me. But first, I needed to survive whatever they were planning to do next. And based on the conversation I had overheard about having me declared mentally incompetent, I suspected their next move would be their most dangerous yet. The week before their scheduled Hawaii trip, my family's psychological warfare reached levels that I never could have imagined from people who claimed to love me. It was like they had decided that if they couldn't control me through financial manipulation and social pressure, they would simply destroy me completely. The attacks became so frequent and so vicious that I began to understand why some people in my situation simply disappear forever rather than continuing to fight. Mom's latest weapon was the legal system itself. She filed a restraining order against me, claiming that I had been making threatening phone calls and showing up at the house to intimidate her and Dad. The allegations were completely fabricated, but the temporary restraining order was granted based solely on her sworn statement. Suddenly, I was legally prohibited from going within 500 feet of my childhood home, which meant I couldn't retrieve personal belongings that I had stored there or even drive down the street where I had grown up. Sarah took advantage of my forced absence to move into my old bedroom and completely redecorate it. When Rose mentioned this to me during a brief phone conversation, she described how Sarah had thrown away everything that remained of my childhood presence in that house. My high school trophies, photos from family vacations, even the furniture I had saved up to buy with my teenage job money were all discarded like garbage. Sarah was literally erasing any evidence that I had ever been part of this family. Dad's contribution to the escalation was professional sabotage. He called my boss Jennifer repeatedly, claiming that he was concerned about my mental health and that I might be dangerous to my coworkers. He told elaborate lies about finding evidence of drug use in my apartment and suggested that the company should conduct random drug testing on me. When that didn't work, he started calling our biggest clients directly, claiming to be a concerned family member who felt obligated to warn them about my instability. Derek's harassment became more brazen and frightening. He broke into my apartment while I was at work, using lock-picking tools that he had apparently learned to use specifically for this purpose. Amanda's recording equipment captured him planting what appeared to be drug paraphernalia in my bedroom and bathroom, clearly intended to support the narrative that I was using illegal substances. He also went through my personal documents, photographing financial statements and private correspondence that he could use to further the family's case against me. The most terrifying escalation came when the family staged what they called an intervention. They hired someone who claimed to be a licensed therapist to meet with me and several family members to discuss my deteriorating mental condition. The fake therapist, who I later learned was actually a friend of Derek's from college, spent an hour asking leading questions designed to make me sound paranoid and delusional when I described what the family had been doing to me. Amanda had warned me that this might happen, so I was prepared when Dr. Williams, a real therapist who specialized in family abuse cases, contacted me afterward. I received a very strange call from someone claiming to represent your family, she explained. They wanted me to sign documents declaring you mentally incompetent based on a session I never conducted. When I told them I had never met you, they hung up immediately. I think you should know that someone is impersonating licensed mental health professionals in an attempt to have you committed. The fake intervention was the closest I came to having a complete breakdown during this entire ordeal. Sitting in a room with people who claimed to love me while they systematically tried to gaslight me into believing that I was losing my mind was almost unbearable. For a few terrifying minutes, I actually started to question my own perception of reality. Had I imagined the financial theft? Was I really becoming paranoid and unstable? The doubt was exactly what they were trying to create, and I could feel myself starting to crack under the psychological pressure. But then came the fourth betrayal, which was so painful that it actually snapped me back to clarity about what was really happening. Tyler, who had been my boyfriend for 8 months and who I thought was my one remaining source of emotional support, revealed that he had been reporting my activities to my family the entire time we had been dating. Sarah asked me to keep an eye on you and let her know if you seemed like you were planning anything drastic, he admitted during what I thought was going to be a romantic dinner. The revelation that Tyler had been a spy in my personal life was devastating, but even worse was learning how long this had been going on. Sarah had apparently seduced him months before he ever asked me out, and his entire relationship with me had been orchestrated as a surveillance operation. Every intimate conversation we had shared, every private moment of vulnerability had been reported back to my family and used to plan their next attacks against me. Tyler went on to explain that Sarah had been sleeping with him regularly throughout our entire relationship and that he had never actually had any romantic feelings for me. "You're nice enough," he said with casual cruelty that reminded me of Sarah's tone when she admitted to sabotaging my birthday cake. "But Sarah is just more fun to be around. Plus, she doesn't have all these weird family issues that make everything complicated." While I was reeling from Tyler's betrayal, James was busy installing security cameras in my apartment that would capture Derek's break-ins and provide undeniable evidence of the harassment campaign. The footage from that week was disturbing to watch. Derek returned multiple times, each time planting new evidence or photographing new documents. On one occasion, he was clearly looking for something specific, going through my financial records with the focused intensity of someone following detailed instructions. But the most chilling discovery came when I found documents that proved my family was planning to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility while they were in Hawaii. Mom had already contacted a private mental health institution and provided them with fabricated evidence of my deteriorating condition. The plan was to have me picked up by medical transport the day after they left for vacation, ensuring that I would be locked away and unable to interfere with their trip or access my bank accounts. The commitment paperwork had already been prepared and signed by the fake therapist who had conducted the intervention. If Amanda hadn't discovered this plan through her legal connections, I would have disappeared into the mental health system with no way to prove that my commitment had been based on lies. The depth of their planning and the calculated nature of their cruelty finally convinced me that these people were not my family in any meaningful sense of the word. They were predators who saw me only as a resource to be exploited and eliminated when I became inconvenient. 3 days before my family's departure for Hawaii, I sat in Amanda's office and finalized a plan that would expose everything they had done to me while protecting me from their attempts to have me committed or arrested on false charges. The plan was complex and risky, but it was the only way to escape their systematic abuse while ensuring that they faced real consequences for years of financial crimes and psychological torture. Amanda had been working around the clock to secure my finances in protected accounts that my family couldn't access, even if they managed to gain power of attorney through fraudulent means. Every legitimate account I owned was transferred to a bank in a different state, with new account numbers and enhanced security protocols. The accounts they had been draining were left open but empty, so their theft attempts would be documented, without actually costing me any more money. The evidence compilation was extensive and damning. Amanda had organized thousands of documents, recordings, photographs, and witness statements into a comprehensive case that proved not only financial abuse but also stalking, harassment, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. We had recordings of Mom admitting to forging my signature on legal documents, video evidence of Derek breaking into my apartment, and financial records showing the systematic theft of hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. But the most significant development was Amanda's contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The scope of my family's criminal activity, particularly Dad's connection to illegal gambling operations and the use of my stolen money to pay debts to dangerous people, had attracted federal attention. Special Agent Rodriguez explained that my case was part of a larger investigation into organized crime's infiltration of suburban gambling rings, and my family's activities had created evidence that could help prosecute much bigger targets. The discovery that Dad's gambling debts involved loan sharks and organized crime figures explained why the family had become so desperate in recent months. They weren't just stealing my money to fund their lifestyle anymore. They were stealing it to keep Dad from being seriously injured or killed by people who didn't accept excuses for late payments. My college fund, my inheritance, my entire financial future had been sacrificed to protect a man who couldn't stop betting money he didn't have. I learned that Mom had taken out a second mortgage on the family home using my credit and forged documents, meaning that I was legally responsible for a debt I had never agreed to. The mortgage payments had been automatically deducted from one of my bank accounts for over a year, and the house was already in foreclosure proceedings because they had stopped making payments months ago. My stolen money had been used to temporarily delay the foreclosure, but now even that strategy was failing. Sarah's wedding planning had been financed entirely through identity theft and credit fraud. The venue deposits, the dress, the catering, even the honeymoon reservations had all been paid for with money stolen from my accounts. Derek apparently knew about this arrangement and had actively participated in the fraud by helping Sarah forge my signature on various contracts and loan applications. But I also discovered something that gave me significant leverage in planning my disappearance. The fake therapist who had conducted the intervention wasn't actually Derek's college friend, as I had been told. He was a convicted con artist who specialized in insurance fraud and had been hired by my family to create false medical documentation. This meant that their entire plan to have me committed was based on documents created by someone with an extensive criminal record, which would make their conspiracy charges much more serious. Amanda helped me create a detailed social media trail that would support the narrative of my disappearance. We crafted posts and messages that suggested increasing mental distress and suicidal ideation, but were careful to make them subtle enough that they wouldn't trigger intervention from friends or coworkers who genuinely cared about my welfare. The goal was to create a believable backstory for why I might have chosen to disappear, while ensuring that people who knew me well would recognize the posts as out of character. James proved invaluable in creating alibis and covering my tracks at work. He agreed to handle my client responsibilities during my planned absence and to provide evidence of my normal behavior leading up to the disappearance. More importantly, he helped me plant subtle evidence of family harassment in my work files, creating a paper trail that would support my claims about their systematic campaign against me. Dr. Williams, the real therapist, provided a comprehensive psychological evaluation that proved my mental competence and documented the effects of long-term psychological abuse. Her report would serve as powerful evidence against any attempt to claim that my disappearance was the result of mental illness rather than a calculated response to systematic family abuse. The most emotionally difficult part of the plan was dealing with Rose's betrayal. Amanda helped me understand that Rose had probably been manipulated just like everyone else, and that her revelation about my adoption had likely been coached by Mom as a way to justify the family's treatment of me. But the decision to include Rose in the consequences of the family's actions was still painful, even though it was necessary for my own protection. On the evening before the family's departure, I wrote detailed letters to each person who would be affected by my disappearance. The The letters explained everything that had happened, provided evidence of the family's crimes, and gave clear instructions for what recipients should do with the information. Amanda would deliver these letters after my disappearance, ensuring that the truth would come out even if something happened to me during the process. The hardest letter to write was to Rose, because despite her recent betrayal, I still remembered all the years when she had been the only family member who truly cared about my well-being. I explained how her revelation about my adoption had been used to hurt me, and I provided evidence that the adoption story itself might have been fabricated as another form of psychological manipulation. But I also told her that I forgave her and hoped that someday we might be able to rebuild our relationship once the truth came out. As I prepared for what might be the most dangerous thing I had ever attempted, I realized that my family's plan to have me committed had actually given me the perfect cover for my disappearance. If I vanished just before their trip, they would initially assume that their psychiatric transport plan had succeeded ahead of schedule. By the time they realized what had actually happened, I would be safely hidden, and the evidence would already be in the hands of law enforcement. The morning of my family's departure for Hawaii, they discovered that my apartment appeared to be completely empty and that I was nowhere to be found. The staging had to be perfect to convince them that this was a genuine disappearance rather than a calculated escape, so Amanda and I had spent hours arranging the scene to tell a specific story about my final hours. My car was found abandoned on the Aurora Bridge, with my purse, phone, and identification left on the passenger seat along with what appeared to be a suicide note. The note, which I had crafted carefully with Amanda's help, mentioned the unbearable weight of family disappointment and my inability to continue living as a burden on people who deserved better than what I could offer them. It was deliberately vague about my intentions, but the location and circumstances were designed to suggest that I had chosen to end my life rather than continue fighting with the family. The initial panic from my family was exactly what we had expected, but their behavior during those first crucial hours revealed everything about their true priorities. Instead of immediately calling search and rescue or organizing volunteer search parties, Mom and Dad were primarily concerned about whether my disappearance would interfere with their vacation plans. Sarah actually suggested that they should go ahead with the Hawaii trip, since there wasn't anything they could do to help with the search anyway. When the police investigation began, my family's performance of grief was Oscar-worthy, but completely unconvincing to anyone who knew what to look for. Mom gave tearful interviews to local news stations about her troubled daughter, who had been struggling with mental health issues for months. She described me as someone who had become increasingly unstable and paranoid, making wild accusations against family members who had only tried to help me through a difficult period. Sarah's social media activity during this period was particularly revealing. While she posted public messages about praying for my safe return and begging me to come home, her private messages and posts told a very different story. James had gained access to her social media accounts through connections with mutual friends, and he documented posts where Sarah complained about the inconvenience of having to cancel vacation plans and worried about whether my disappearance would affect her wedding timeline. Dad's behavior was even more damning. Within hours of my disappearance being reported, he was at the bank attempting to access my life insurance policies and demanding information about how long he would have to wait before I could be declared legally dead. The bank manager, who had been briefed by Amanda about the ongoing financial abuse investigation, documented Dad's requests and provided the information to law enforcement as evidence of his suspicious behavior. Derek's reaction to my disappearance was to immediately propose upgrading Sarah's wedding venue to a more expensive location, arguing that they might as well spend the money on something nice, since I wasn't going to be around to object anymore. This conversation was recorded by one of Sarah's friends who had become suspicious of the family's behavior and had started documenting their responses to my disappearance. Meanwhile, I was safely hidden at Amanda's remote cabin in the mountains, watching news coverage of my own disappearance and collecting evidence of my family's true feelings about my presumed death. The cabin was completely off the grid, with no internet or cell phone service that could be traced back to my location. Amanda had stocked it with supplies for several weeks, and we had arranged for a trusted friend of hers to check on me periodically without knowing my exact location. The hardest part of watching the news coverage was seeing how convincingly my family performed their grief for the cameras while privately celebrating my absence. But it was also validating to finally have undeniable proof of their true feelings about me. Every fake tear, every manipulated interview, every private celebration was being documented and would eventually be used as evidence in their criminal trials. The FBI investigation into Dad's gambling connections accelerated rapidly once I disappeared. Special Agent Rodriguez explained later that my disappearance had triggered enhanced scrutiny of the organized crime figures who had been taking Dad's payments. When those payments suddenly stopped, it created pressure that led to new information about the scope of the illegal gambling operation and its connections to other criminal activities. James's role during this period was crucial in maintaining the illusion that my disappearance was genuine. He provided police with evidence of my normal behavior at work leading up to the disappearance, but also documented the harassment calls and strange visitors that had been disrupting my professional life. His testimony would later be essential in proving that my family had been systematically trying to destroy my career as part of their abuse campaign. The second week of my disappearance brought new developments that exceeded even Amanda's expectations for how quickly the investigation would progress. Sarah's friends started coming forward with recordings and screenshots of her inappropriate celebrations during what should have been a period of mourning. The contrast between her public grief and her private joy became impossible to ignore, even for people who had initially believed the family's version of events. Mom's attempts to cash in on my disappearance became increasingly desperate and obvious. She set up a GoFundMe account ostensibly to raise money for search efforts, but the funds were actually being used to pay for extended vacation time in Hawaii while the search continued. She also contacted my employer to inquire about accessing my retirement accounts and life insurance benefits, claiming that the family needed money to hire private investigators. By the time 2 weeks had passed, law enforcement had compiled enough evidence of suspicious behavior to obtain search warrants for the family home, Sarah's apartment, and Derek's residence. The searches revealed extensive evidence of financial fraud, identity theft, and the coordinated harassment campaign that had driven me to disappear. More importantly, they found documentation of the plan to have me involuntarily committed based on fabricated medical evidence. The discovery of the commitment paperwork was the turning point that transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a multi-agency criminal investigation. The involvement of the fake therapist, the forged medical documents, and the conspiracy to have me imprisoned based on lies elevated the charges to federal-level crimes that carried serious prison sentences. As I sat in Amanda's cabin reading news reports about search warrants being executed at my family's properties, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness that surprised me. Relief that the truth was finally coming out, but sadness that it had taken my complete disappearance to reveal what these people really thought of me. The family I had spent 27 years trying to please and belong to had never actually wanted me as anything more than a source of money they could drain whenever they needed it. A week into their Hawaii vacation, my family's carefully constructed lies began collapsing faster than they could create new ones. The FBI raid on our family home happened at 6 a.m. Pacific time, which meant it was noon in Hawaii when Mom got the phone call from a neighbor describing police cars, federal agents, and evidence boxes being carried out of the house she had grown up in. The timing couldn't have been worse for their vacation narrative. Bank account freezes meant that their credit cards stopped working while they were in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration of family unity. Dad was arrested at their Maui resort by Hawaiian police acting on an outstanding warrant for gambling fraud that had been issued by a federal judge in Colorado. The other hotel guests watched as he was led away in handcuffs while Mom screamed about their rights and demanded to speak to a lawyer. Mom's arrest warrant was served the following day when she tried to board a flight back to Denver. The charges included identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and filing false police reports. The evidence against her was overwhelming, thanks to the recordings Amanda and I had made, and the financial documentation that proved years of systematic theft from my accounts. Sarah's reaction to the family's legal troubles was exactly what I had expected. She immediately distanced herself from Mom and Dad, claiming that she had been an innocent victim of their manipulation and had never known about the financial crimes. But Derek, faced with his own charges for stalking, breaking and entering, and conspiracy, quickly turned against Sarah and provided investigators with detailed information about her involvement in planning and executing the harassment campaign against me. The revelation that Sarah had been the mastermind behind many of the psychological torture tactics was actually surprising even to me. Derek's confession revealed that she had been the one to suggest forging my signature on the mortgage documents. She had planned the birthday cake humiliation as the opening move in a campaign to make me seem unstable, and she had recruited Tyler to spy on me months before their plan went into full effect. Derek abandoned Sarah completely when he realized that his own criminal charges were serious enough to result in prison time. He flew back to Denver alone, leaving her stranded in Hawaii with no money, no transportation, and no way to contact the family members who were also under arrest. The fairy tale engagement fell apart when Derek realized that the wedding he thought was being paid for with family money had actually been financed through identity theft that could implicate him as an accessory to federal crimes. Sarah was forced to call extended family members who barely knew her to beg for money to get home from Hawaii. But by then, the news coverage of the family's crimes had reached everyone in our social circle. Aunts and uncles who had sided against me during the fake intervention were now learning that everything I had accused the family of doing was not only true but actually worse than I had revealed. The relatives who Sarah contacted for help refused to get involved, afraid that any association with our family might implicate them in the criminal investigation. The media coverage of my family's arrest was extensive and damning. Local news stations interviewed neighbors who described years of suspicious activity, former family friends who admitted they had always thought something was wrong with how I was treated, and financial experts who explained how family financial abuse was more common and more devastating than most people realized. The story became a cautionary tale about trusting family members with access to your financial accounts. While my family was dealing with the collapse of their criminal enterprise, I was preparing to emerge from hiding with full legal protection and a comprehensive plan for rebuilding my life. Amanda had secured restraining orders against all of them, frozen any remaining assets that had been purchased with stolen money, and prepared civil lawsuits that would recover not just the money they had stolen but also damages for the emotional and professional harm their campaign had caused. The decision to come out of hiding was carefully timed to maximize the impact on their legal cases, while ensuring my own safety. By waiting until they were all either in custody or under such intense law enforcement scrutiny that they couldn't retaliate, I eliminated the risk that they might try to harm me when they learned I was still alive. James had been promoted at work after his role in helping expose the harassment campaign was recognized by our management team. His documentation of Derek's stalking behavior and the suspicious phone calls to our office had been crucial evidence in building the federal case. More importantly, his loyalty during the most difficult period of my life had proven that it was possible to build family relationships based on choice and mutual respect rather than biological accident. Tyler's attempts to contact me once the truth came out were pathetic and transparent. He claimed that he had never really understood what Sarah was asking him to do, and that he had developed genuine feelings for me despite the circumstances of our relationship. But Amanda advised me to treat any contact from him as potential evidence tampering, since his testimony would be crucial in Sarah's trial. His sudden concern for my welfare was obviously motivated by fear of his own legal exposure rather than any authentic regret for the betrayal. Rose's reaction to learning the truth about what had been done to me was heartbreaking but ultimately healing. She had been completely manipulated by Mom and had believed that her revelation about my adoption was helping me understand why I felt different from the rest of the family. When she learned that the adoption story itself had been fabricated as another form of psychological abuse, she was devastated by how thoroughly she had been used as a weapon against me. The community response to the revelation that I was still alive was overwhelmingly supportive. People who had been fooled by the family's performance of grief felt betrayed and angry when they learned how they had been manipulated. The fake GoFundMe account became evidence of additional fraud charges, and the contributors demanded that Mom be prosecuted for every penny she had stolen from people who had genuinely wanted to help find me. But the most satisfying moment of the entire ordeal came when I walked into the federal courthouse for my family's arraignment hearing. The looks of shock, Fear and finally recognition that they had been completely outmaneuvered was worth every moment of stress and planning that had gone into my disappearance. They had spent years treating me like I was too weak and too stupid to fight back effectively. Now they were learning exactly how wrong they had been about my capabilities. 6 months after my dramatic reappearance, the legal consequences for my family's years of systematic abuse were finally being handed down by judges who had been shocked by the scope and cruelty of their crimes. The courtroom was packed with people who had followed my story through the media coverage, and many of them had become advocates for other victims of family financial abuse who were finding the courage to speak out about their own experiences. Mom received a 5-year federal prison sentence for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. The judge was particularly harsh in her sentencing because of the psychological manipulation tactics that had been used to isolate me from potential sources of help. The defendant didn't just steal money, Judge Martinez explained during sentencing. She systematically destroyed her daughter's ability to trust her own perceptions of reality. This kind of psychological abuse can be more devastating than physical violence. Dad's sentence was even longer at 7 years in federal prison. His gambling addiction was treated as an explanation for his behavior, but not an excuse for the criminal methods he had used to fund it. The connection to organized crime figures made his case particularly serious, and his cooperation with federal investigators into the illegal gambling operation earned him only a modest reduction in his sentence. The judge made it clear that his years of using me as collateral for his dangerous debts had put my life at risk in ways that went far beyond financial harm. Sarah's trial was the most difficult for me to attend, because despite everything she had done, she was still the little sister I had tried to protect and support for most of my life. She received 3 years of probation and was ordered to pay full restitution for her role in the financial crimes. Her cooperation in providing evidence against Derek had helped reduce her sentence, but the judge made it clear that her manipulation tactics had been particularly cruel because of the trust relationship that should have existed between siblings. Derek faced the most serious charges related to stalking, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping through the false commitment scheme. His sentence of 5 years in state prison reflected the judge's concern about the escalating nature of his harassment campaign and the potential for violence that had been building in his behavior. The evidence of him planting drugs in my apartment and installing tracking devices on my car demonstrated a level of premeditation that the court found deeply disturbing. The financial recovery process was more successful than Amanda had initially predicted. Through civil lawsuits and criminal restitution orders, I was able to recover not only the money that had been stolen from me, but also additional damages for the emotional trauma and professional harm that their campaign had caused. The house that had been mortgaged using my forged signature was sold to pay restitution, and the proceeds were sufficient to cover most of the debt that had been illegally created in my name. But the most meaningful outcome of the entire ordeal was the founding of the Morrison Foundation for Family Abuse Survivors, named after my legal name, but dedicated to helping people whose families had betrayed them in similar ways. The foundation provides legal assistance, financial planning services, and emotional support for people who are dealing with financial abuse from family members. Within the first year, we were helping over 300 families nationwide who had reached out after seeing my story in the media. Amanda became not just my lawyer, but one of my closest friends and the legal advisor for the foundation. Her expertise in financial abuse cases was invaluable in developing programs that could help other victims navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of fighting back against family members who were exploiting them. She often said that my case had taught her new tactics that she was able to use to help other clients achieve better outcomes in their own situations. James and I developed a romantic relationship that grew naturally out of the friendship and mutual support that had sustained us both through the crisis. Unlike my relationship with Tyler, which had been based on deception and surveillance, my connection with James was built on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. He understood the trauma of family abuse from his own childhood experiences, which made him uniquely qualified to be a partner in my healing process. Dr. Williams became the Foundation's chief psychological consultant and helped us develop therapy programs specifically designed for people who had been betrayed by their families. Traditional family therapy approaches often assume that family relationships are worth preserving, but our programs recognize that sometimes the healthiest choice is to build new family structures based on chosen relationships rather than biological accidents. Rose eventually moved in with me to help with the foundation's day-to-day operations. The revelation that my adoption story had been fabricated as another form of psychological manipulation had devastated her, but it also freed her to develop a genuine relationship with me for the first time. She often said that learning the truth about Mom's manipulation had helped her understand why she had always felt uncomfortable with how I was treated, even when she couldn't articulate exactly what was wrong. Tyler's attempts to reconcile were firmly and permanently rejected, despite his persistent claims that he had developed real feelings for me during our fake relationship. The Foundation's legal team treated his contact attempts as potential evidence tampering, since his testimony was still needed for ongoing criminal cases. But more importantly, I had learned that trust, once broken through deliberate betrayal, couldn't be rebuilt simply because someone claimed to be sorry about getting caught. The media attention around my story led to opportunities to speak publicly about family financial abuse and the warning signs that people should watch for in their own relationships. I testified before congressional committees that were considering new laws to protect victims of family financial abuse, and I worked with financial institutions to develop better procedures for identifying and preventing identity theft by family members. But perhaps the most healing experience was the final confrontation with Sarah during a prison visit that Mom had requested during her incarceration. Sarah had asked to meet with me to apologize and to try to explain why she had participated in the years of systematic abuse. The conversation was painful but ultimately helpful in understanding how the family dynamics had developed over time and why she had felt justified in treating me as an outsider who deserved punishment rather than protection. Sarah's explanation revealed that she had been told from a very young age that I was adopted and that her role was to prove herself more worthy of the family's resources and attention. The competition between us hadn't been natural sibling rivalry. It had been deliberately fostered by parents who had used our relationship as a tool to manipulate both of us. Understanding this context didn't excuse her behavior, but it did help me see how we had both been victims of parents who had treated their children as pawns in psychological games rather than human beings deserving of love and protection. I chose to forgive Sarah and Derek and even Mom and Dad, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to anger was preventing me from fully enjoying the new life I had built. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what they had done or allowing them back into my life. It meant releasing the emotional energy that had been consumed by resentment and redirecting it toward helping other people who were facing similar challenges. The Foundation's success exceeded all my expectations. Within 2 years, we were operating in 15 states and had helped over 1,000 families recover from financial abuse. The legal precedents established through my case had made it easier for other victims to pursue criminal charges and civil recovery. More importantly, the public awareness created by our advocacy work was helping people recognize the warning signs of family financial abuse before it escalated to the level of systematic theft and psychological torture. As I stood before a packed auditorium at our second annual Foundation conference, looking out at hundreds of survivors who had found the courage to speak out and fight back against their abusive families, I realized that my disappearance had accomplished something far more important than just escaping my own situation. It had created a movement of people who refused to accept that family relationships should involve exploitation or abuse, and who were committed to building healthier definitions of what family could mean. The woman standing at that podium was completely different from the person who had stared at a birthday cake with the wrong name just 2 years earlier. That woman had been isolated, confused, and desperate for approval from people who saw her only as a source of money they could drain whenever they needed it. But this woman had learned that real family isn't about biological connections or legal obligations. It's about choosing to love and support each other through both celebrations and challenges. My final thought, as I concluded my speech to the conference attendees, was about the strange gift that my family's cruelty had ultimately given me. By destroying the illusion that I belonged with them, they had freed me to discover where I actually belonged. Sometimes disappearing really is the only way to truly be seen. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought was your family to find the people who will actually treat you like family. And sometimes the greatest revenge against people who tried to make you disappear is to come back stronger, happier, and surrounded by people who value you for exactly who you are. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to thank you for taking this journey with me through some of the darkest and most challenging experiences of my life. But I also want to ask you something important. Have you ever experienced financial abuse or psychological manipulation from family members? Have you seen warning signs in your own relationships that remind you of what I went through? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who is feeling isolated and confused about their family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us reach more people who might benefit from understanding these patterns of family abuse. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships. And please share this video with anyone you think might need to hear it, because awareness and education are the first steps toward protecting yourself and others from this kind of systematic abuse. Thank you for listening to my story, for supporting survivors of family abuse, and for believing that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and genuine love regardless of their biological family circumstances. Remember that you have the power to choose your own family and to demand better treatment than what some people accept as normal. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that abuse is acceptable just because it comes from people who claim to love you.